right, welcome everyone to episode 19 of Paperboy Ventures. Today we're joined by James Arthur Smith, the co-founder and CEO of Seatopia. James, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Kyle. Pleasure to be here. Let's do this.
Honestly, honored to have you. Thank you for joining. It's such an interesting story what you're building at Seatopia. I think it's one of the most unique, timely things that's happening in the food space today. Truly mean that. So we'll unpack the full story throughout the conversation today. But before we really go any further, could you just give us the quick elevator pitch? What is Seatopia?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in a nutshell, it's kind of like Butcher Box for seafood, where Butcher Box helped really create the market for grass-fed beef through their direct-to-consumer subscription model. But what differentiates Utopia is that we are 100% focused on seafood, and we're the first box that has a truly scalable source of seafood. We're specifically working with farms, and we're working with the best-in-class farms. And kind of like Butcher Box created the market in many ways for grass-fed beef, we're doing something similar with microalgae fed and finished fish. So healthier farming. So helping transition commodity fish farms to better practices. And one of the ways that we do that is incentivize that is through lab testing. We lab test every lot that we receive. And the certificate of analyses that we receive quantifies things like mercury levels to ensure that it's safe levels of mercury even for a pregnant woman, microplastics, zero detectable microplastics in any of our products, and we quantify the omega-3s, the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. So you can actually create an incentive for this transition from things like canola oil and rapeseed oil being fed to fish to microalgae that actually boost omegas, so EPA and DHA. So we are creating a direct-to-consumer supply chain of certified clean seafood that gets delivered nationwide.
Amazing. So to read that back, it's essentially the healthiest, most nutrition dense seafood that you can buy in the US, and it's done through, let's get a definition, aquaculture, right? Which
Mhm.
is farming. I know a lot of people aren't going to be so familiar with how that process works. I think people mostly think about wild caught against farm raised. It sounds
Yeah.
like what you're really building out is the best possible version of farm raised.
Yeah. I mean, we've been testing seafood for a long time, and invariably, what we found is the cleanest fish consistently is being produced in clean environments, fed a clean diet. And when you look at wild caught seafood, which is not truly scalable, there's a finite supply, and that supply is harder and harder to access, is becoming increasingly not only inconsistent, but increasingly toxic with microplastics and forever chemicals and mercury levels. For example, mercury levels are up 300%. So when we work with farms in the same way that we raise cattle or chicken, you have a huge variety of farming methodologies. Some produce commodity foods for people that don't really care, and then others are producing best in class farm raised, pasture raised, grass finished. Those practices produce healthier food for people who care. And we're working to create the market for healthier seafood by working with the best in class aquaculture practices. So it's sort of the maturation of the aquaculture industry is helping bring optionality and incentivize healthier practices. And the end result of this is we're actually able to have regenerative impact both on the oceans while creating healthier food for people who want to vote with their dollars for food that is cleaner for their homes, cleaner for their families. They want to eat seafood that helps them feel healthy and live longer, and all the research associated to increased omega-3s without the risks of mercury and microplastics and other things.
Yeah, it makes sense. And the cleaner the environment, the cleaner the diet, the better the output is going to be in the higher quality seafood that you're going to get. So it's really great what you're doing. And I think, looking at your background, you just have this super unique, I'll say, life experience that's put you on this path. you sort of grew up in marine biology, and you have also the consumer products experience that makes you dangerous in the world of sales and distribution of food products. So, can you kind of talk about your early influences and what got you started working with the oceans and marine life?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kyle. Um, yeah, in many ways, it goes all the way back to when I was a kid. My mom worked at SeaWorld. She was a photographer for SeaWorld San Diego, and my dad was a lifeguard. So I was really immersed in the oceans very early on, and I thought being a Shamu trainer was going to be awesome. So as like a pre-pubescent teenager, I was volunteering at this aquarium on an estuary in Chula Vista, and I started down that path because I wanted to get experience, right, so that I could get into marine mammalogy. In that process, I was exposed to the concept of regenerative aquaculture because on this estuary, um, we had these beautiful aquariums where people can come and touch horn sharks and leopard sharks and stingrays and bat rays and learn about all the different ecosystems and wildlife that live in these environments like estuaries. Estuaries are a really important part of the ecosystem because it's like the nursery and breeding grounds for so many species. A lot of species that live in the ocean come up into these estuaries to breed, and some of them even go up rivers. Things like steelhead trout and salmon would go through these environments. So um, there was a demonstration steelhead trout rehabilitation project there. So we were raising steelhead trout, showing how they could be bred in captivity, how the fingerlings could be grown to maturity to either be harvested for humans or even released into the wild to rehabilitate. So this project planted the seed that steelhead trout could be reintroduced to the local waters to rehabilitate the local streams and rivers and lakes and raised to maturity to feed our local community or even exported. And that concept was this seed that germinated for 20 years. In the interim, I did various things, but to your point, in the natural products space, with my friend Daniel Cook, we built a company called Quinoa Decadence, which was an energy bar to nationwide distribution in Whole Foods. It was a certified fair trade, gluten free, vegan, like all of the things that you would want. For a while, we were the best selling energy bar in Southern California, but we ended up selling that company, and I had a little bit of time to rethink where I wanted to go. And where I wanted to go was deeper into ocean spaces. I wanted to get involved in aquaculture, and I really approached it from a mission perspective on how do we create that regenerative aquaculture experience? How do we be not only good stewards of the ocean, but actually have a net positive impact? And so I found at the time one of the most innovative aquaculture facilities in the Sea of Cortez and got to work with these beautiful Campachi, Seriola rivliana, these yellowtail being grown in deep water offshore pens and turquoise water, best in class practices, swimming with thousands of fish in this aquarium like offshore environment. And we brought to market these, for this example of what aquaculture could be raised on novel seeds, microalgae, and things like low density farming. And the market said, we're not really willing to pay what you're saying it costs to produce that. We would gladly buy it, all of it and more if you can lower the prices and do what other people do. And experience with the energy bars, because when we first started that business, it was really on this concept of like, let's sell a niche product to an audience that is highly engaged. And we started selling before we got into Whole Foods, we were selling at a yoga studio because we had this relationship with these ambassadors, these yoga teachers that helped us develop various lines of products. And so we were like at all the hip yoga studios, and we had all these yoga teachers involved in helping us uh, create products and create demand, and that brought in Whole Foods, and that created this core consumer who was really invested in what we were doing. And really appreciated what we're doing. So selling direct to consumers, we also sold online. We had a subscription box and all these things. So selling direct to consumer, selling direct to uh, these niche audiences informed a lot of my thinking when I got into seafood, and I realized the commoditized seafood distribution was stifling innovation because there was not incentive for optionality. Literally, the distributors said, we pay based on species and country of origin, which is so generic. That'd be like saying that all cattle in the United States is the same quality. And yet we know there's a vast difference from like factory farmed cattle farms that smell from
Yeah.
4 miles away to these beautiful regenerative pastures, same thing was needed in aquaculture and is needed. And that's why Seatopia exists. It is to bring optionality and incentivize change. And so um, over the last however many years, I've been working a lot on this sort of demand and market side, trying to create that incentive. And Seatopia is the most efficient tool that we've developed to engage consumers in this process and provide optionality for farms.
You make such an interesting point about the distributors kind of being the gatekeepers in the industry and really just operating off of those core few attributes because they know that they could sell that to the masses in the United States. And you also brought up, starting to build that awareness on the consumer side. And it feels like we're hitting a new wave with food in this country where people are demanding much more transparency and they want to know exactly what the inputs are in the end products that they eat. So it feels like you're kind of riding a mini tidal wave at this point, and I know the business is growing, and we'll get to that. But it's really it just feels like the time is right for this. Based on what I'm not an expert in anything that you're doing in aquaculture and all that, but I do know my way around the food and beverage space in this country, and I get a good amount of consumer sentiment, and I think you're riding a bigger trend that I don't think it's all on you to build that awareness. I think you're kind of there's this mass that's growing underneath you.
Look, a couple years ago, like 4 years ago, it was in many ways people will be like, I think your business is a little early, but especially with this sort of make America healthy again movement and this push to like remove dyes from foods and to remove seed oils, it is absolutely aligned. We are catching this trend of this wind is blowing, and we've been positioning this boat to catch this wind, and we're now like our sails are full and we're really really moving. It's a long time coming because when we started this business it was a trickle of interest from people who uh, frankly were stoked on the product because they were familiar with the restaurants we used to sell to. Like once upon a time I used to sell to high-end white tablecloth Michelin star restaurants that had a sort of farm to table business model that derived value from being able to tell an authentic story on where their chicken and their beef and their tomatoes came from. Then we started bringing them to the farm to visit the aquaculture facilities, and they were like, "Oh, this is great! Like now we have this beautiful story, authenticity, scalability, predictability. Awesome." Those restaurant groups, when they closed during COVID, everything closed during COVID was really the impetus for Seatopia, but it was a trickle at the beginning, and it's really been growing, double digits as of late.
Right. And just to set the framing on where you've come from here and some timelines. So what years were you running the protein bar business? Was that like 2010?
It
Can
was
you
in the
just tell us?
teens.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then you sold that business, and then your mission was to go after regenerative aquaculture. So that's when you actually started, I guess, like the first seed of Seatopia. I don't know if it was it called Seatopia when you did that with the restaurant distribution, or was it called something else?
The first pitch deck that I circulated was pre-COVID, and it was called Sea Change Collective. And the learnings that we have along the way are reflective a lot in the way we talk about Seatopia. At the beginning, it was like the most sustainable from the most sustainable farms, uh, previously only available at these top Michelin star restaurants. And the reality is, a lot of the farms we work with today, pre-COVID, were on strict allocation to these best restaurants in the world, because these restaurants had huge demand and they were the most high profile places, and these chefs with their Michelin stars, like these, they got priority, and there wasn't, some of these are artisan farms, there's not huge production. When all those restaurants closed, the deck was circulated not only to a handful of investors, but to some of these farms. And they were like, please, like, we would love to sell, because everybody who had animals that needed to be fed, uh, without a predictable future of sales, everybody started harvesting, processing, and freezing. Whereas previously, everybody was selling whole fresh fish, right? Now everybody harvested, processed, froze, and was just sitting on inventory. And so I came along and was like, I would love to sell to this niche audience who's familiar with high-end restaurants, who would like to eat some of this product at home, because now we had this captive audience of people who wanted to buy perishable goods online that didn't exist pre-COVID. And so that's where Seatopia started, and that was 2020. Um, and it was a trickle. It was growing organically. I um, worked with a 3PL, and we were trying to figure out how to grow it, and it just kind of started growing slowly. And my wife and I, at that time, it was growing so slowly, we are like, let's go do something else. And we were living on a sailboat at the time, and we took off and we sailed from Los Angeles down to Central America. um, it was awesome. We had this only like two goals. We were like, we're going to visit every marine protected area along the way and dive with whales and sharks and all that. And we wanted to visit all the aquaculture facilities along the way. And we saw some amazing, beautiful things and other things that kind of broke our hearts. But in this experience, um, you know, being in nature for that long period of time, and COVID kind of like low traffic zones, like we had such awesome experiences, fishing, catching fish, diving. Um, Along the way, my wife got pregnant. I had enough um, knowledge of the seafood industry and data and research, and she had seen everything that I've been researching, and to inform us, where she was like, I don't want to eat the fish that you're catching anymore. I only want to eat stuff that doesn't have mercury or microplastics in it. And that was such a humbling moment, because I was so proud of being able to catch our own fish and all of that. And yet we also knew that there was fish being raised on these innovative feeds like microalgae oils and insect proteins that were quantifiably lower in mercury and microplastics and all these things. And she was just like so hard on it. She's like, I'm only going to eat this stuff. Like, we have to get to shore, we have to get to access, and we're going to have a healthy baby raised on tons of omega-3s, on without risks of mercury. And she was also experiencing the same, where she didn't feel comfortable digesting uh, red meat and all these other things. And she just wanted seafood. And so it was kind of um, like this um, driver of where Seatopia needed to go, was our real world experience, was how do you get sushi grade clean seafood that's safe for a pregnant woman. And we had a handful of connections to farms that were already doing these pilot projects, not just doing sustainable seafood, but doing healthy seafood on these alternative feeds that were quantifiably safe and processed in a safe manner. So for example, parasites is a concern in a lot of seafood that you don't want to expose a pregnant woman to. Well, there are feeds that are certified parasite free, right? Like, it's raised on a manufactured diet that is clean and nutrient rich and all these things, but it's certified no parasites. And then it's frozen via the FDA guidelines for parasite destruction, just to ensure that there's also no parasites in there. And that's like perfect situation, right? You have like double uh, layers of protection there. So that insight really informed, or that experience really informed, like what we wanted to do. And if you look at the website in like the Wayback Machine, it was like sustainable farm, sustainable seafood. And today we're not even using the word sustainable, I don't think anymore. We're just focused. It's still like we're still doing the best in class sustainability, but what's driving dollars and awareness is this healthier, cleaner seafood, right? Like the website today, I think on the homepage says lab tested certified clean seafood. It's the same thing we were doing before, just with this nuance of we're only working with the farms that are doing these feeds with that result in these outcomes, right? So how do you, and then lab testing it to verify it so that consumers, including pregnant women and biohackers and new moms and all these like consumers that were kind of on the sidelines or not even in the seafood space before are joining Seatopia because they want access to the most bioavailable form of proteins and omega-3s. Like when you eat raw seafood, you get the full bioavailability of the omega-3s in the triglyceride form, which is very different than when you get in a shelf-stable omega-3 supplement, which is in this ethyl ester form, and your liver has to convert it. And that's why you feel kind of bloated or like burpy after you take those supplements. Your body just efficiently digests beautiful sushi grade seafood. But how do you get sushi grade seafood that you know is clean, that you know is safe? Well, you have to know what it was fed, and you have to know how it was handled and processed. And you have to know that it was delivered to you frozen with a thermometer to ensure that it was frozen throughout the supply chain. And we do that now with Seatopia today.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's super traceable. Everything is up for the consumer to see, and where it's harvested, and all the testing. It's pretty incredible. But I want to go back to what you were talking about on the wild caught side of things, because I think there's a common perception amongst the general consumer in the US that wild caught's the best, right?
yeah,
You can't get much better than
so
that. It's the most natural. So what is it about the we're generalizing here, but the state of the oceans? Is it the pollution that's causing the biggest issue that leads to microplastics and the end product? Is it like the overfishing that's depleting populations? Like what are the biggest issues when it comes to wild caught seafood?
well, first I'll say this: wild caught makes sense because it's so ingrained in our DNA and our history, right? Like we evolved along the shorelines, foraging for wild caught shellfish and catching wild seafood in estuaries, and fishing is so ingrained in our even recent history and culture, right? Like fishing communities are really core to our history and our culture. So to say that wild caught seafood is not the healthiest or cleanest is really disruptive to a lot of our psyche and a lot of our thinking and a lot of our history. Unfortunately, every coal fire plant in the world has emissions that are going up, and the effluent of those emissions is releasing massive quantities of mercury, and that mercury then falls back to the down into the environment, into the lakes and the rivers, or directly into the ocean, and is being consumed by phytoplankton and zooplankton, and then that gets consumed by larger, little bit one step up the trophic level, like anchovetas and sardines. And then those sardines get consumed by mackerel. And every time it goes up a trophic level, because mercury sits in the fat tissues, it is biomagnifying, bioaccumulating. So it might only have, you know, point 0.1 parts per million of mercury in the anchoveta, but then when it gets to the mackerel, it could be three times that. Or and then when it gets to something like an albacore, it could be 10 times that, or a bluefin tuna, it could be 100 times that. And then when it gets to a swordfish or a shark or a killer whale, you have 1,000 times that. So this biomagnification of mercury that is coming up the food chain is holding all that mercury that we've been releasing back into the environment. It's not just dissipating it into anywhere. So that's one thing. That's mercury. But you also have microplastics, which are ubiquitous. Like there was a recent study done on microplastics in waters of Alaska, and every single water sample came back with microplastics. It's not like there's a place in the ocean where we haven't distributed our trash and our plastics. And then you have forever chemicals. So we have been progressively putting more and more pressure on the ocean ecosystems with these toxins that come down our rivers and come out of our landfills and come out of the runoff of fertilizers and pesticides that are being put onto crops. It all is going downstream into the ocean, and it affects the ocean ecosystem, and it is showing up in the tissues of seafood. And then overfishing is a thing. Overfishing is a thing because there's a finite supply, and the FAO and any sort of global agency that tracks seafood agrees that in 2020, the global production of seafood plateaued. And we have not been able to produce more seafood globally since 2020. In fact, it's been decreasing. There is not a new ocean or a new depth of seafood that we can go and find. In fact, the latest thing they've been trying to do is harvest krill, which is like these small little shrimp in the Arctic that are the base food system for myriad species like penguins and whales and like everything in the Arctic. And particularly these massive whales are dependent on that. And when we disrupt that ecosystem because we're trying to go further offshore and harvest smaller and smaller seafood, it is potentially a tipping point for ocean health. And overfishing is an issue. If everybody in the world wanted to eat only wild salmon, we would deplete the entire population of wild salmon in a week. It is not a scalable source of seafood at this point. We have passed that point. Thus, aquaculture was conceived to raise fish in the same way that civilization has evolved from being hunter gatherers. We no longer hunt buffalo, we raise cattle. Well, Jacques Cousteau famously said the mark of civilization is the transition from hunters and gatherers to farmers. And we need to learn how to do the same thing in the ocean to evolve from extraction to cultivation and farming. And that's what we're trying to do with Seatopia, is incentivize this transition to better practices of farming to create truly scalable food sources. So there's a lot of problems with wild caught seafood, but from a business perspective, anybody who's been in the industry a long time knows that the boats are going further offshore and getting less and less consistent supply and smaller fish. And anybody who's looked at lab tests would see that we are unfortunately not getting cleaner and cleaner fish.
Right.
So the the time to focus on aquaculture is now. We have sort of aquaculture happens to be one of the fastest growing food production sectors because it is coming in to fill the void where wild caught is decreasing. We still have, as you indicated, a lot of consumer sentiment that wild caught is better. And in some cases, that is purely cultural. In other cases, that is reinforced by deeply entrenched marketing dollars that are trying to support the vestiges of a evolving industry. You have, the Alaskan Fisheries Cooperative, not a small industry, not a small producer that has a very significant budget every year with the sole mission of saying that Alaskan seafood is the best seafood in the world. And the most efficient way to do that is to say that farmed is bad and Alaskan is good. There's not a lot of nuance to that. There's not a lot of story, but it's really easy to digest that. As a consumer, you hear that and you resonate with that. That's easy. What we're doing is actually quite a bit harder. We're trying to tell this nuanced story that farmed raised isn't good or bad. Farmed is a thing, and the types of farming practices are going to distinguish whether it was good or bad. And we're also saying that we're selling frozen seafood. We're not doing fresh seafood. And a lot of people believe that fresh is best, when in reality, fresh doesn't indicate how long it's been fresh for, right? We empower consumers to take it out of their freezer when they want to say, hey, this is now going to be fresh. And we freeze it using the most the latest technology in freezing. So we're using things like nitrogen freezing and blast freezing to ensure that at peak freshness, it's harvested and frozen to keep it fresh, keep it at that peak moment of bioavailability and freshness, and it stays locked in at those temperatures, delivered with dry ice to your door. And if it's not frozen when you get there, we replace it. And there's a thermometer in there to ensure that it was frozen throughout the supply chain. And we go to great lengths to ensure that it's frozen and kept at the sub-freezing temperatures the entire way, because seafood is very fragile. The reason why most grocery stores smell fishy is that it hasn't been kept at the right temperature. There's been fluctuations in temperature, and it's been fresh for too long. Like, if anything in the seafood in the Stopia catalog smells fishy, it's not doesn't get sold, right? It gets replaced. The
Right. So
only
let
way to
so
do that,
let me get this straight. So when I'm in a grocery store, all of that seafood that's fresh in the container, it was all previously frozen and then it was thawed out and put in that case in 24, 48 hours before I walked in. Right.
usually, yeah. I mean, there's very, very few exceptions where a fisherman goes out just for one day and keeps it fresh the whole time. Most cases, fishing boats are going out for multiple days at a time, if not weeks or months. And you don't keep something fresh that whole time, you freeze it. How was it frozen? Was it kept at the right temperature? Did it get defrosted and then refrozen anywhere along the way? And then how long was it displayed as fresh at the grocery store? All affect the quality. And frankly, the best meat in the world, like a lot of people are familiar with dry aged meat, right? Dry aged meat could be 30 days old or 60 days old or 100 days old, and you can still eat it and it's delicious. But they didn't keep it on ice during that whole period of time. If you keep, if you kept a piece of meat in the same way that people try to keep seafood on ice in a cold, wet environment, that piece of meat, steak, is going to go bad, rancid in that petri dish really quick. The only way that it's able to be maintain its quality is that it's in a low humidity, cold environment. And most grocery stores are maintaining this vision of like an ice box with fresh fish sitting on ice because of this cultural idea, but it's totally wrong. Like, they shouldn't be doing that. They should keep it frozen or they should keep it in a dry ager. And anything other than that is creating a stinky, smelly environment. And that's why, unfortunately, the grocery stores in the United States have this association of smelly fish. They need to evolve into a different way of handling fish. And when you catch seafood in the ocean, it doesn't smell fishy. It smells like the ocean. It is the terroir, it's the merroir of the ocean that you should be tasting and smelling. It should be the minerality of the ocean that you smell. And anything in Seatopia, it smells like ocean. It doesn't smell like fish, because that is an indicator of the oxidation of omega-3 fatty acids that have started to go rancid.
It's fascinating that I, all grocery stores are set up that way, and at least I don't know of. There's probably a couple
Yeah.
of niche ones, but for the mass consumer, that's just the way it's always been done. I think until people like you come around and start to wake some folks up. So
Yeah.
super cool to hear about. I want to touch on we went through wild caught. I think it's pretty incredible how you publicize all of the aquaculture farms that you work with. You can go right to the website and see videos and photos of where they are and how they harvest and all this. And I think you work with, did you say 16 different aquaculture farms across the world?
At the moment, yeah. We are Our business model is really intended to transition commodity farms to better practices. So we're constantly trying to onboard new farms. Like, big farm might have a pilot project to do some innovative project with better feeds, etc. Like, we're like, hey, we'll actually, doesn't have to be a pilot project. We'll actually buy it, right? We just need you to use these feeds and these practices. And once it's harvested, we send it to a laboratory, quantify the cleanliness and the nutrient levels. And as long as it meets the Seatopia standard, we'll onboard them. So that's a growing thing, but at the moment, about 16.
Yeah, and that was part of my question is like how do you figure out if it's a the highest quality type aquaculture farm? It sounds like it's the feed and the environment are the two biggest factors. But yeah, can you just talk to like how when you visit one of these, how do you determine if that fits your criteria?
So first of all, it has to be sustainable, right? That's like table stakes. So there are farms that are raising bluefin tuna, and we don't sell tuna. Like we could sell a lot more if we sold wild caught seafood because it's super easy. We could also sell a lot more if we sold tuna because it's really easy to sell. But I don't sell either of those because as a mission, we're trying to build truly scalable food system. And neither of those, in our opinion, are truly scalable. Like there's enough demand on those things already. We don't need another business selling wild caught seafood. We need more nuance in how people learn about and access seafood in order to incentivize change. And tuna, as a species, have a very high metabolism, so much so that it takes about 16 pounds of feed to get them to grow 1 pound because they're constantly moving, they're constantly burning energy, they're actually warm blooded. All of these things mean that it's not the best species to build a seafood a supply chain for humans, right? Like we should focus on things that are more efficient. So, for example, Kampachi grow can be fed on a diet that results in about a 1-to-1 ratio, like 1 pound of feed equals 1 pound of growth. That is a more efficient use of the resources that we have on the planet. So sustainability is kind of table stakes. So do they have a third party audit on their sustainability standards? Kind of helps like that first layer or filter. The second is um, what's in the feed and is it resulting in seafood that is quantifiably higher levels of omega 3s, not omega 6s. So a lot of the industry, we're in like phase 3 of aquaculture innovation, like we call it aquaculture 3.0. 1.0 was just like 1970s was like the first salmon farms. It's a pretty nascent industry, really. Like the first salmon farms started in the 70s in um, Norway, and they just took salmon. They said, "Hey, salmon in the wild are eating these sardines and anchovies and mackerel. We're going to grind them up. We're going to feed it to fish in a pelletized diet that we can make semi-shelf stable." And that resulted in nutrient levels that was very similar to the wild Atlantic salmon. The problem is you're growing an increasing quantity of farm-raised salmon, and there's still a finite supply of bait fish. And so as that industry grew, global organizations said that's not scalable. You should reduce dependency on forage fish. And in many cases, the industry did that. They shifted from primarily feeding with um, fish oil and fish meal from bait fish to supplementing with proteins and fats from land based agriculture. The problem is most affordable forms of land-based protein and fats comes from GMO corn and soy and canola oil and rapeseed, and that is not what the fish would normally eat. It's not part of their species appropriate diet. And when you feed humans a lot of that stuff, we get like inflammation, fatty liver, same exact things happen to fish. When you feed them corn and soy and canola oil, they get the fatty liver, they get inflammation, they're more susceptible to disease. And so a lot of those farms started using antibiotics and things like that to prevent mass disease. Aquaculture 3.0 is a nuance where we are trying to find the most species appropriate diet that is nutrient dense and bioavailable for those fish to be healthy and have a healthy immune system. And to, as a result of healthier fish, it actually produces healthier seafood for humans as well. So this is one of the most common misconceptions about fish is that they produce omega 3s. And the reality is, fish don't produce omega 3s. All omega 3s in seafood come from microalgae. Microalgae are the base source of all the omega 3s in seafood that get bioaccumulated in the food system. So phytoplankton and zooplankton being consumed by smaller trophic species is getting into seafood, and that's how they get those omega-3s that become heart healthy. Aquaculture 3.0 says, well, why don't we just take farmed microalgae, extract the oils through fermentation, and create feeds that are omega-3 rich. So the DHA and EPA extracted from industrial farmed microalgae, that is truly a scalable source of those healthy fats, paired with truly scalable sources of protein, like insect protein for species that eat insects in nature. So things like steelhead and salmon eat insects. It's part of their natural diet. When a salmon or a steelhead is up in a river system, guess what? They love insects. And even when they're in the ocean, they will bite at insects at the surface. That's why fly fishing is a thing. When you go fly fishing, you are creating a lure that looks like an insect because it's part of their diet. And when you give them things that are appropriate for their species, that has the nutrients that they're looking for, the amino acids like the taurine that they need, they're healthier and they don't need the antibiotics. And then the seafood that comes out of it is healthier for us. So that's kind of where we're at today is aquaculture 3.0 is not just sustainable, but actually scalable and nutrient rich. And that all comes down to diet. Cool. And farming practices and site location and all these other things. But the 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 feed and incentivizing this transition to microalgae fed and finished and things like natural astaxanthin. These are the innovations that are resulting in healthier seafood and healthier farming practices and a healthier relationship to our oceans. And this is the foundation of aquaculture 3.0 and this evolution towards regenerative practices.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I didn't know, as a layman, I was unfamiliar with the omega-3 story you just laid out and how it's all driven from the microalgae feed. And I think and the insects protein also being a huge component for certain species. There's definitely a huge piece of consumer education that, like, I don't know if we're ever going to get to that point. I think the healthier seafood is the lead, and then certain people will look deeper into the process and geek out about it,
Yeah,
like you do, and I do
yeah,
occasionally. But
yeah.
it's clearly needed in the industry, and it's great to hear about all that you're working on. I know we could talk about this all day, but we only have a few minutes left. I would love to sort of pivot to the business side of things. And I know that you've been building this for a few years now, and going back to COVID, switching over to the direct to consumer model. And really, in the past year, I know you've hit a new growth trajectory. So, can you just speak to how things are going right now? And I know it's direct to consumer. You also do subscription. What are you learning and finding out about consumers? How are they buying? Are they coming on and going on subscription? And is it all direct to consumer, or do you do retail as well?
Um, we are primarily uh, a direct to consumer brand because selling to retail requires less margin and a different terms. And because of cash flow constraints, we've focused all of our energy on direct to consumer, where we get the most margin. We have a credit card on file where the consumer pays in advance, right? Like this is great for a cash strap company. And we've really built this through that lens was how do we capture the most margin and hold on to our cash as much as we can. My experience with distributors based on my previous business was they want 30-day terms and they pay on 60 or 90.
Oh, the
They
cash
want,
cycle. Yeah.
yeah, the cash cycle sucks. And in order for us to be a good partner to farms, we have to pay the farmer in the best terms possible and the best price, right? And that just didn't work, right? That just it was one step backwards. So what we're trying to do with the brand is build the most trusted brand in seafood to be we have two customers. We have the end consumer that we've talked a lot about, and then we have the farmer. and we have to serve both of those with our business model. So we're direct to consumer. We have full transparency in all the products. You can QR code on every single product, get all the information about the farm, the farming practices, and the certificate of analysis and all that. Um, we sell in a subscription box, I'd say, but you can also buy a la carte. Our business model, we've learned that people are sometimes intimidated to get on a subscription. So you can buy a la carte, you can get a small box and try it. The products are so good that people realize, hey, this is much better than the quality I can get anywhere else. It's not like ButcherBox where like potentially I can get better quality or similar quality at the grocery store or whatever. Like, you literally can't get this quality at your local grocery store. And that's what we hear time and time again, is that this quality is so much better. And I feel great that I'm feeding my family something healthy. And people convert to subscribers. So more than 60% of our monthly revenue is coming from subscribers. But our marketing is not forcing people into subscription. So that's really helped. We've been seeing double digit growth, and a lot of it is, one-time purchase funnel, and then we move them into the subscription. Um,
Yeah, and I'd
uh,
have to imagine that price is the biggest barrier, knowing how expensive it is to run these farms and transport and test and get everything to the point of highest quality. How niche do you think this market is? Do you think it's the top few percent, or do you think it could expand larger than that?
it's only niche at the moment because we are focusing on this core differentiation of certified clean seafood, and we're primarily just selling the center cut fillets, right? Like, we're selling the center cut fillets that are these beautiful fatty pieces that really differentiate us in the market. But as we scale, there's a lot of opportunity for us to go broader, right? Like, eventually our brand has so much ability to go into retail and wholesale and all these things, but we're focused here, and we're focused initially on these premium sushi gate products. But like, literally this week, I just received samples of some hot dogs, fish hot dogs, used from the trim of some of the seafood that we're working with. So in taking the center cut fillets, and we sell these in the subscription box for people who want that perfect, beautiful, individually packaged portion that just all you gotta do is put it on the plate and slice it, and you have a beautiful sashimi. But everything else, the cartilage in the bones, the fats in the eyeballs and the brain, and the all the nutrients in the liver and the heart, ground up and put in a clean casing, turned into a hot dog for kids and anybody else who wants clean seafood, is sort of one example of how the brand will evolve. Another example of how it will evolve is shelf stable products, things like fish sticks or fish chips, like jerkies and these high nutrient rich stable things that we can broaden the customer. So as we expand into different horizontal uh, sales channels, like the hot dogs or the trim or the jerkies, we will not be just this super expensive sushi grade thing, and so it becomes a lot more approachable. It's niche right now because we're doing a lot of education and building the Seatopia brand and associating Seatopia as the most trusted source for seafood. Thus, we are a bit premium, not significantly, because the cool thing about disintermediation and cutting out all these middlemen is, like, most distributors are operating on a 30% margin or retaining that, right? And most seafood goes through like six different hands, 6 to 9 different hands before it finally gets to the retailer. So we're cutting out so many layers of not only inefficiencies in supply chain, but also additional unnecessary margin, right? So Seatopia is on par with what you would get for fish at Whole Foods, but much better in quality. I'm just talking about price, much better in quality, much better in transparency and story and nutrition, all these things, just because we're cutting out all these middlemen and working directly with the farms and selling direct to the consumer. And we have the subscription model and all these things. So it's a business model intended to bring a better quality seafood to a larger audience, and we will find a broader audience as the economies of scale allow us to broaden our product offering.
Yeah, it makes sense. And essentially you are the distributor. You are the marketer. You source, you do the work of those intermediaries, and you get a higher quality product to the end consumer by cutting out all of those parties. So
And we really are celebrating the farms, right? Like it's important. And this is, I think, a huge shortfall of the existing distribution is that we believe that there are farms worth celebrating, there are farming practices worth celebrating. And when you just sell generic, like country of origin and species, you're not doing a service to those farms, right? Like we believe that there will be emerging farm stories that will be sort of like the Snake River farms of the world. Like there's specific farms, specific farming practices that people will come to celebrate. And that's what we're trying to do with Seatopia is be the champion of those best practices and those best farms.
amazing. Well, James, thank you so much for coming on. It's an incredible story, and I can't wait to see where you take this. And just to close things off, I think after hearing everything that you're working on and your background in particular, it feels like this is sort of your life's mission, your life's work, and you're building on all the experiences of your past. Where do you see this going? Is this a company that you plan to run for a long time? Are you thinking of an exit at some point? What's on your mind when it comes to the future?
This is definitely my baby, you know, but I also have two little girls. And the thing that really motivates me is being able to create something that's healthier for our family and that they'll be proud of, right? And what I envision is so one of the cool things that we do with Seatopia is, last year every box that we shipped out planted kelp, and we planted thousands of kelp. Like I think in the Pacific Northwest, the number was 16,000 kelp trees were planted, and we're working with these different kelp projects and different restoration projects. We're going to move into mangroves and Hawaiian fish pond restoration. And these rehabilitation projects that we're also supporting is a KPI for me on our impact, right? Like, not only are we eating healthier, but I want to be able to take my daughters to one of these marine protected areas, one of these kelp forests that we've created, and see it teeming, have them see it and experience what abundant oceans looks like and feels, and know that, like, this is the work that we've done. We're creating this. And there is this beautiful sort of vision and mission for Seatopia in that capacity. And the practical sort of sense of things, are we going to continue running it indefinitely? I'm not certain. There's some really interesting synergies with some larger private equity groups that own aquaculture facilities and feed mills, and it's a really good strategic vertical integration for them. And so we've started some of those conversations. As long as it's mission aligned and we are in many ways reducing risk for them because there's no farmer, no like mission driven fund like these that is in the space because they want to produce shitty quality seafood. Most of these mission aligned funds and or aquaculture marine biologists got into space because they want to be good stewards of the ocean, right? But and Seatopia is helping facilitate that, helping reduce the risk to do more innovative projects. So I'm open to some of those exits. We've started some of those conversations, but right now it's we're still aggregating demand, building the snowball, and if we can continue to scale in this way, like we're scaling our impact, absolutely. Like the vision is create a low risk model for farms to transition their feed practices to things that are healthier for the planet and healthier for humans. And that's what Seatopia is doing. And as we scale, we're scaling that impact. And I do believe that we can change the seafood industry, change the way that food is produced around the world, because there is enough people who want healthier food. There's a lot of data that shows people are willing to pay a premium for cleaner foods, cleaner products, and we're riding that wave in a direct and measurable way with seafood.
Well said. Keep riding it. we're all fans here, and we'll be following. So thank you so much, James, and congrats on all the work you're doing.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate you diving into this matter. I think it's important, and grateful to be sharing this work. Excited for the future.